It is my distinct privilege tonight to introduce our keynote speaker, Barry Smitherman. Many of you know that Barry is the former chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission, and that is one of the oldest regulatory agencies in the state of Texas. It does not regulate the railroads. It regulates the oil and gas industry, which has propelled Texas to its standard as the leader in the world in the oil and gas industry. It's created billions of dollars for the state, for its citizens, for companies, lots of jobs, and it's the same thing could potentially happen here in Israel. That's why we're all involved here from Texas. We want to see that happen. Despite its name, so I told you that the Railroad Commission doesn't regulate railroads. So before Barry was in public service, he was a highly regarded investment banker, which I didn't know that until earlier today, holding leadership positions with firms including Lazard, First Boston, J.P. Morgan, and Bank One. He managed billions of dollars in municipal bond offerings on behalf of state and local governments. In 2007, Barry began his public service as a member of the Public Utilities Commission of Texas, the PUCT, where he handled routing disputes, acted as a liaison with the Texas legislature, which I don't envy you one bit, and service providers and landowners. That had to have been an interesting situation for you, and very provided, after all of those years of managing billions of dollars in government funding, to do that, it had to be great. In 2011, Barry was appointed to the Railroad Commission to serve an unexpired term, and after that won a statewide election for a 2-year term, and was chosen shortly after that by his peers to serve as chairman. Barry's experience in the PUCT and the Railroad Commission, along with his service on national and regional energy-focused boards and committees, give him particular insight into emerging developments such as unconventional oil and gas development, electric transmission development, renewable energy generation, and energy storage. Barry is notably the only person to ever serve on both the PUCT and the Railroad Commission, and is known as an authority on emerging energy trends. Today, Barry's a partner in the law firm of Vinson & Elkins, and he practices in Austin, and he specializes in energy regulation. We're pleased and honored to have Barry participate in the second Universal Oil and Gas Conference in his first trip to Israel. Please help me welcome Barry Smith.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Claire. You delivered that in a very characteristically understated Texas way. And I'm happy that you clarified what the Railroad Commission does and does not do. Now, it's really worse than that. It's elected and it's a regulator, Dan. Two combinations that are not particularly good together. Now, in this crowd, I'm eager to say that we regulate the oil and gas pipeline, gas distribution utilities in Texas. When you're running for office, you can be sometimes selective in how you say what you do. For example, I had a lady come up to me and say, "I've ridden on your trains. Your employees are so considerate." I said, "Thank you very much. We train them to be that way." On the other hand, I've had a dad come up to me and say, "There's a railroad crossing arm in my neighborhood. And every morning when I'm trying to get my child to school, it seems to be down. Can you fix that?" Sir, we have nothing to do with railroads. I'm sorry, you'll have to take it up with someone else. You know, about 3 years ago, I was on a trade mission to China. And we had about 4 or 5 people from Texas. We had people from California and Midwestern states, East Coast. And about the third day, we huddled together in a dinner like this Victor, you'll appreciate this very much. And we were going to talk about what we had seen and experienced in China. And just as we were beginning, a lady jumped up and said, "Hey, I just want to say something before all the Texans pile in." So you're surrounded by a lot of Texans here this evening. And this is going to be a characteristically Texas address, and I'll apologize for that. On your table, I've given you some maps and some graphs. So first, I want you to look at the map of Texas. Those red and green dots represent oil and gas wells. Now, the first thing that jumps out on the page is, man, there's a lot of them. Yes, as a matter of fact, there are. Presently in Texas, we have 182,000 producing oil wells. 182,000. And we have approximately 96,000 gas wells. All told, since we've been at this since 1901, when Spindletop came in on the east side of Houston, we think we punched about 1 million wells in the state of Texas. The second thing to notice about this map is that the dots are widespread. They're not just concentrated in one area. So we have plays up in North Texas, West Texas, South Texas, East Texas. So that generates great political support. When you've got producing wells in almost every representative's district, you know how they feel about the oil and gas industry. That's very important. Lastly, history belongs to those that write it. Well, map making is an art as well. I made the map, so we decided we would make oil wells green and not black. So green is oil, red is gas. From here on, when you see a Texas Railroad Commission map, what you're going to see is green for money and for the environment, and red for gas. Now, in my time with you this evening, I'm going to try to play on some of the themes that we've talked about for the last couple of days. And Michael and Joshua, I agree with Claire. It's been a fantastic couple of days. Thank you for assembling this crowd. It is undisputed that my home state of Texas has benefited tremendously from the oil and gas industry since 2008, 2009. We benefited upstream with the jobs created in the drilling, fracking, and producing arena. We benefited downstream with our incredible petrochem complex along the coast. We've benefited in fertilizer and plastics and anyone that uses natural gas as a feedstock, because now we have incredibly low natural gas prices. And we've also benefited from cheap electricity. You'll see on some charts, some pie charts behind the map, the tale of how we have evolved in Texas from burning a lot of coal to burning more natural gas. Concentrate on the figures for 2015, and you'll see that for the first time this year, we will make electricity and half of our commodity resource is natural gas. That's quite a change for us. The great thing about it is it's good for the environment. Texas has reduced its CO2 emissions down to 1972 levels. On a per capita basis, we're down to 1960 levels. And in addition, it's so cheap. Now, you're not going to believe this, but in Texas today, you can buy electricity for 5 cents a kilowatt hour. You can buy 100% renewable electricity for 8 cents a kilowatt hour. In fact, I went on a website this afternoon that advertises all the offerings, and we have a competitive electric market, so you can actually shop for your electric provider, just like you would shop for any other product. There was one company, now I didn't recognize the name of this company, so I'm not recommending it. They offered a 12-month fixed-rate product for electricity at 2.6 cents a kilowatt hour.
Could you name that company?
I don't remember who it was, Claire, but you can find it. If you go to powertochoose.org, you can find it. Now, what I want to try together, to tie together in my comments are three pillars that I think are critical for success, and we've touched on these. One is job creation from the oil and gas industry. The second one is economic development. The third one is effective regulation. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to spend a little bit of time, though the Admiral talked about this, on energy security and national security. The oil and gas upstream world is a super job creator. It's not just a job creator, it's a super job creator. When you run for office, you get to meet a lot of interesting people, including oil and gas billionaires. In fact, a couple of years ago, I'm sitting at the Petroleum Club in Midland, and I look around the room, and I start doing a little calculation, and I said, you know, I think I'm in the presence of about $50 billion of wealth. I don't know if you believe in supply-side trickle-down economics, but I can tell you, people that make that much money, they spend a lot of money. And that industry up at that level hires frac crews and sand crews and work crews and trucks and water haulers and landmen and everyone all the way down the food chain. It's incredible. And since the beginning of the Great Recession, which began in earnest in December of 2007 in America, Texas job creation has outstripped that of the rest of the country. Now, I'm not going to go into why we had the Great Recession, whether it was interest rates were too low after 9/11, we had a housing bubble, we had risky derivative trades among the banks, or the fact that at one point in advance of the beginning of the recession, we posted a $140 crude price. That is the topic of another discussion. But I'm going to go over a few numbers. Now, I apologize to the attorneys in the room. There is some math involved. But it's not particularly complicated. Follow me on this. For the U.S. in total, pre-recession employment peaked in January of 2008 at 138 million jobs, and then declined by almost 9 million jobs to the bottom point of the recession, which was in February of 2010. And it was not until the end of last year that the U.S. economy had gained those jobs back, plus had added another 1.4 million jobs. Gained the jobs lost, Gina, added 1.4 net. By contrast, Texas pre-recession employment peaked in August of 2008 at 10.6 million. We lost 400,000 jobs. We gained all those back by September of 11, and by the end of last year had added another 1.2 million jobs. So here's the math problem. Texas gained 1.2 million, U.S. gained 1.4 million. Remarkable. And when you add into that the fact that it looks like North Dakota, the second largest oil-producing state in America, added about 8% of all the new jobs, then the math is Texas and North Dakota accounted for 93% of all jobs created in America between 2008 and 2014. Extraordinary. So where did those jobs come from in particular? Well, they were mining, logging, and construction. You know, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing really began in the Barnett Shale. On your map, that is up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's the red area. And George Mitchell, God rest his soul, a great Texan, great Aggie. I don't have any Aggies in the room. Anybody go to Texas A&M? Those from Houston know what I'm talking about. You know, he was frustrated because the price of natural gas had gotten to $12 or $13 an MMBTU. And he had a lot of property he had leased up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And over the advice of his own board of directors and his engineers, he began to experiment with horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And lo and behold, it worked. In fact, it was so successful that in 1 year, we added 2 BCF per day to the Texas production of natural gas. And by 2014, gas production in Texas had peaked at 23.5 BCF a day. That's 1/3 of all the gas production in America. Now, the greatest recipe for high prices is high prices because they incent the private sector to get innovative and creative. And this innovation and creation found so much natural gas, the price collapsed. In fact, at one point, it was $1.99 in Texas. So these enterprising oil and gas operators said, I wonder if we can take this horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing combination and look for oil instead of gas. And that's what they began to do. First in the Eagle Ford Shale, which on your map is that area that runs from the Rio Grande Mexican border to the northeast toward Houston. And lo and behold, it worked. We began to find oil in areas that we had never found it before. Then that technique was taken from the Eagle Ford Shale to the Permian Basin, which is out in West Texas. Now, did you ever wonder why George H.W. Bush left Connecticut to go to Midland? He knew something that we didn't know. There's a lot of oil in Midland. And in fact, we were so successful that Texas oil production went from 900,000 in 2008 to 2.7 million barrels per day last year. 2.7 million. That's 40% of all the production in America. As a result, Texas shale producers have become the global swing producer, or so we thought. And the production numbers continue to go up. In fact, in spite of the fact that we're now touching at $40 a barrel on crude, Texas production of oil continues to go up. We have not rolled over on the top because wells that were drilled a year ago are still producing, and in some places, property that has to be held by production continues to be drilled out. So there's no doubt about it. The Texas oil and gas industry contributed greatly to the generation of jobs. In December 2009, Texas had 190,000 mining jobs and added another 127 until January of this year. Now, a recent economic study agrees with my supposition that this is a super job creator, not just an ordinary job creator. They use a 5.3 job multiplier. For every one direct job in the oil and gas industry, it creates another 5.3 indirect jobs. Well, that gets us to 800,000 jobs created just by the oil and gas industry out of the 1.2 million jobs created from recession to end of the recession. The Economist magazine recently said the differential in earnings between oil jobs and other jobs has actually widened over the last few years. It's not just that there are more of those jobs, it's that they pay more. In Texas, the average oil and gas job pays $125,000 a year. So let me tell you, if you're a high school graduate working down in the Eagle Ford Shale, and you can pass a driving test and a drug test, now the latter are sometimes challenging, you can make $80,000 to $100,000 driving a truck. At least you could until recently. So the job creation was spread over all sectors of the economy. Some academicians at Dartmouth University recently published a study, in the last 2 weeks, where they look at the job creation effect and economic development of the oil and gas industry at the site of the well, within the county, and within the region, and ultimately within the state. Here's what they say. Every $1 million of oil and gas extracted produces $66,000 in wages and 0.78 jobs within the county. Within the region, it's 2.49 jobs, and within the state, it's 3.34 jobs. In other words, it's not just localized. It spreads out from where the well is drilled to the county and the region and the state, and ultimately, if applicable here in Israel, to the entire country. They say our results suggest that new oil and gas extraction led to an increase in U.S. employment of 725,000 jobs. That's pretty darn close to the 800,000 job number that we think was created in Texas, and a large percentage of the 1.2 million of all jobs created in Texas, and even a pretty big percentage of the 1.4 million of all jobs created in America from 2008 to the end of last year. Now, I want to segue from there into the role of regulation. And let me tell you, Michael, I had no idea we were going to talk this much about regulation over the last couple of days. Now, it's obvious there's been some issues, but it sounds like they've been sorted out a little bit. It's really undisputed that if you get the regulation right, that you can unleash a super job engine in the oil and gas sector. For over 100 years, the Railroad Commission has regulated the oil and gas industry. In fact, next year we'll celebrate our 125th anniversary. At first we had the railroads, then we found oil in 1901. Now we're all about oil. We have simple underlying principles, and they are this. One, rule of capture. On private land, you own the oil, assuming you own the mineral interest underneath your property. Two, the protection of correlative rights. More about that in a moment. And three, the prevention of waste. Now, you're going to love this. Our definition of waste is hydrocarbon trapped in the earth and not brought to the surface. That's waste. It is of no value if it's not utilized. So everything that we do is about capturing and bringing it to the surface. For example, we have long-standing spacing regulations. Depending upon the field, we tell you how many wells you can drill per certain number of acres. In some fields, it's bigger, and others, it's smaller. You have the option to drill a well on your property, or you can combine your property with your neighbor's property and drill a well, and you can split the revenues. That's the protection of correlative rights. You get to capture the oil under your property, but you don't get to capture the oil under my property without paying me for it. But we don't want wells sitting side by side, chewing up resources, depleting the reservoir, and otherwise endangering the effective long-term capture of the revenue stream. Now, we have tweaked our rules a little bit over the years, but not much. With the advent of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, we had to really step up our game the last 3 or 4 years, because you can't drill a well in Texas without first getting a permit from the Railroad Commission. From 2012 through last year, we issued 70,000 drilling permits. In fact, we were issuing on average 90 per day. So what do you think the average turnaround time for an operator is who comes to the Railroad Commission, submitting an application to drill and getting a final permit? In the United States, on federal land, it's 2 to 3 years. At the Railroad Commission, it's 5 days. It's 3 days if you ask for it to be expedited. And to get it expedited, you pay a $750 fee. That is because we have made a commitment to enable the industry to do what they do best. That requires putting the right people in the right seats with the right technology, such that they can do their job, so the operators can do their job. To repeat what I said earlier, hydrocarbon stuck in the earth is waste. We got to get it to the surface so it can be utilized. Now, we've made a tweak here and there on spacing rules, on the ability to require someone to be in a unit to deal with recalcitrant landowners. But all in all, we've had a very light touch. Regulation has been predictable, transparent, and involves all the stakeholders. One of the most significant rewrites of our rules that we did in the last couple of years was we updated our well construction rules for the first time in 30 years. Because when you're fracking a well, you're doing it under high pressure. And we wanted to make sure that we had the right kind of steel, the right amount of cement, that we had protected certain critical areas downhole. Because the last thing we want is some sort of an accident. Or we don't want production commingling with fresh water. Or we don't want your well commingling with my well. At first, the stakeholder community was not too thrilled about this. It was going to cost more money. It was going to potentially delay spudding and completing a well. But after about 12 months of working together, we got it done. And in fact, for the first time, the Sierra Club, I hope you're familiar with that, it's one of our environmental groups, actually praised the Railroad Commission for the work that they had done. That was a red letter day for all of us. That's what I mean by predictable and consistent regulation. Admiral, I'm going to try to now wrap into this some energy and national security issues because of all places on the globe, nobody needs to give you all a lecture on national security issues. You've been dealing with this for a long time. And we want to think about, as an American, the beginning of this being in 1973. The Yom Kippur War and the first blockade and cartel moratorium on shipments of oil to the United States. Really, it goes back to World War II. If you read William Manchester's 3-volume biography of Winston Churchill, he says the following. Churchill knew that if he got the Americans into World War II, that we would win, that the Allies would win. Because this war, according to Churchill, would come down to which side could bleed the most oil. And America could bleed more than Germany. Fast forward to where we are in the 70s. I'm old enough to remember gasoline lines in Houston, of all places. High inflation, job losses. Well, what we may not have realized was it wasn't just affecting America. The quadrupling and then doubling again of oil prices in the 70s affected every Western capital. In fact, I just completed a book called The Oil Kings, which talks about this period of time. And between Nixon and Ford, German Chancellor Kohl spoke to them about what was happening in West Germany at the time. He said, look, we have pressure on the left from the communist and on the right from the fascist because we have hyperinflation, we're losing jobs, and our industry cannot afford to pay this much for oil. So not only was our economies at risk because of the withholding of oil from Western democracies, but democracy itself was at risk. We were teetering on the edge because no country, no economy can withstand that kind of a shock. Now, we look at what is happening today, and it's really almost just the opposite of that. The price of oil has gone from $100 down to $40. And we haven't seen this sort of price volatility in a long time. It is clear that you should, as Dan Yergin says, own the commanding heights. You need to have control of your own energy resources to protect you against those who would try to withhold for diplomatic or other purposes. What is happening now is that prices are getting to be so low that we're laying off people in the oil and gas business globally, in America, and in Texas. It's been estimated that the recoverable oil opportunity in the Permian Basin is 50 billion barrels. 50 billion barrels. There's only one oil field in the world that approaches that. That's Guaybar in Saudi Arabia. So sitting in Little West Texas in the Permian Basin is the second biggest oil field in the world. But how much longer can we keep people employed in that field at sub-$40 oil? It's very hard to predict. I would suggest to you that as Israel looks at these issues going forward, it's incredibly important that you don't just focus on any of them, that you focus on job creation, on the proper regulation, and on national security. Having your own resource and control over it puts you at the bargaining table like you've never been before. And in turn, you will be absolutely one of the great countries in the world. Thank you very much. Michael, I don't know if you want to do any Q&A. I was actually supposed to give a head nod to when they were going to bring out the food, and I forgot to do it. So it may be a few minutes before she's laughing at me right now when the entree is served. But, sure.
Who stole that off you?
What's that?
Who stole that off you?
I can't wait. Let me see what it says. Which part?
This looks like a Sykes-Picot set of lines in the northeastern corner.
It's too horizontal.
This way?
Too horizontal.
Let me find my copy of that. Hold on a second.
And I just wanted to say that having read recently about American exceptionalism and the way your president queried it at the 2009 NATO conference, maybe President Obama should have been here this evening. I want to congratulate you on your presentation.
Well, listen, there is the question was, about American exceptionalism and job creation. Has been sort of this raging debate about whether low oil prices are good for America or not. Here's the politics of it. There are 42 states that are net consuming states that are positively affected by low oil prices. There are 8 states that are negatively affected by low oil prices, Texas being the most predominant, the only one with any electoral votes, the only one that really matters. And so even Richard Fisher, the outgoing president of the Dallas Fed, in an early 2015 speech said, and I quote, "Those that say low oil prices are bad for Texas are full of bull crap." Well, Richard Fisher was wrong. Let me tell you why he's wrong. This is different. Because we were creating the jobs here in America. We were creating the jobs here. It wasn't like back in the old days when a reduction in the price of imported oil was net beneficial to consuming America. What we lost in this go-round is we lost these supercharged, high-paying jobs. And I was being a little bit facetious about sitting in a room with 50 billionaires. But the amount of money that is spent in the economy by people who make that much that quick is a jump start like nothing you can believe. Outside of Silicon Valley, I'm not sure that in America there's another industry that can have that big of an effect in that short of a period of time. wonder why they're scrambling to, well, we'll go back to our whining conversation. Thank you very much.